Hey, it's Tommy Z and welcome to Tommy Z Travels. Whenever I say I'm from New York, people think skyscrapers, celebrities, and taxis. And since I live in New York, let's discuss. Is New York just a city? What many people don't realize is that New York City is 3,000 square miles or 780 square kilometers. New York State is 54,500 square miles or 141,000 square kilometers. Which means that New York City only actually makes up for about 0.5% of the actual land mass of New York State. What you may not know is that New York State has huge mountains, beautiful waterfalls, wineries as far as the eye can see down beautiful lakes, farms, and vast forests. Population-wise, New York City consists of Brooklyn, Bronx, Manhattan, Queens, and Staten Island, the 5 districts. And the total amount of the population there is approximately 13.4 million. Now, if you take the whole of New York State, subtract out the 13.4 million, you'll end up with 6 million, which amounts for everything else outside of New York City. So let's discuss 3 pros and cons of New York City and the rest of the state. I'll keep each one kind of brief so that it's not a super long video. So let's start with New York City. Number 3, business. As many people know, there are huge stores to go shopping at. In reality, you can find anything you could ever want in New York City. And even outside of the shopping, lots of famous people do business in New York City and can occasionally be seen. New York City truly is always booming with business. Number 2, diversity. New York City has one of the largest varieties of people, and with that, New York City also has one of the most largest varieties of languages spoken in any city. So if you're a foodie, good news for you. You want Texas-style barbecue, Mediterranean, Filipino, African, Mexican, Indian, they have it all. Whatever you want, there is a restaurant for you. And with Google Maps these days, you can type in exactly what you're looking for, get the hours, the location, and a lot of times you'll even have the menu to look for so you can get exactly what you want. Number 1, architecture and landmarks. New York City has some of the most amazing buildings and historic monuments. From the Empire State Building to the Statue of Liberty, there's so much that you can see there. What I always thought was really interesting was that you could see an old church standing right next to an entire skyscraper that's all glass and has a modern design to it. New York City truly is a world of its own. So now we'll move on to the 3 cons of New York City. Number 3, density. Much like any city, density can make things very difficult. With that many people, going to a popular spot of interest can be really difficult. And as of recording this, it's winter time, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so with the extra amount of people, you also have more sniffles, sneezes, and coughs all around you. So with that said, density does make things a little more difficult to get around. Number 2, expensive. New York City is not cheap. You can find ways to get around the city on budget, but even the fast food places are pretty expensive in comparison. Luckily, some attractions are free, but sometimes you do have to pay to get in, and they can be a little bit on the costly side. Hotel prices, of course, can range from something that a middle-class guy like me can kind of afford, all the way up to penthouse executive, celebrity-style rooftop places that cost an absolute fortune. So getting around New York City on a budget can be done. What you'll need to do is pre-plan a little bit with your transportation, accommodations, and food, and try to balance out what is the most important thing to you. Number 1, traffic. If you drive through New York City, be prepared for some crazy traffic. Lots of cars and lots of people all over the place make it very difficult to get around. New York City definitely isn't the worst place on earth for traffic, but it's not also the best. On some of the connecting bridges, you'll have people doing 10 miles an hour under the speed limit, up to plus 60 miles an hour over the speed limit. Accidents do seem frequent, so be prepared to detour if needed. If you're visiting, I'd suggest sticking to the subway and public transportation. So moving on, and for the sake of an argument, we'll say anything from New York City up is upstate New York. Number 3, quiet. So earlier, I gave you the statistic of landmass and population. There's a huge amount of land with a much smaller population. It's so much easier to just breathe and relax. Even the cities up here like Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse are much smaller in comparison. But with that, there's a lot less light and sound pollution. So if you're looking for a quieter getaway, upstate New York is for you. Number 2, cheaper. Unlike New York City, most places in upstate New York can be much cheaper. Generally, anything from the hotel, the attractions, or the food will be a lot cheaper for you. And if you're looking to save a little bit of money, go down to a local grocery store, pick up some stuff, and have a nice little picnic. Number 1, natural beauty and natural landmarks. Unlike New York City's man-made beauty, upstate New York relies more on its natural beauty. And like I said before, there's mountains, waterfalls, wineries up the lakes, and vast forests that you can visit. Even people from the city love to visit upstate New York, especially in the fall time, to see the color changing all over the state. But of course, anytime during the year you can drive up through the lakes and stop at a little winery and just enjoy the view. And now we'll switch over to 3 of the cons of upstate New York. Number 3, far between places. Being that the landmass of New York is so large, it can take some time to go from place to place. Many of the times, if you take the major upstate cities, generally it can take an hour to an hour and a half to drive between the two. In New York City, you can expect some time to drive from place to place because of the amount of traffic, but upstate is just the sheer distance between place to place. So if you decide you want to go somewhere particular, plan for a whole day to do just that thing, come back, and then do the next thing the next day. Number 2, nightlife. Unlike New York City, the city that never sleeps, upstate has much less of a nightlife. Even a lot of the cities tend to kind of go quieter after around 9 p.m. But generally after that, all you'll see is a few bars and restaurants open. But unlike New York City's selection of bars and restaurants, the selection up here is much smaller. Number 1, lower diversity. Unlike the city, the diversity here is much lower. Around here, there's a lot of burger and steak places, but not generally a lot of ethnic places. In most of the upstate area, you'll definitely find some Chinese takeout and Mexican restaurants, but you won't be able to find much other than that. If you're looking for something like Vietnamese or Greek, you may have to travel a good distance to be able to get to any of those places. Being that my fiance is Filipino, even cooking supplies have been difficult to find. With all that said, New York State has one of the most iconic cities on earth, world-famous waterfalls like Niagara Falls, mountains, wineries on the lakes, and beautiful state forests to hike through. And later on, I'll make some videos about New York City traveling and upstate travel so you can get an idea of where to go when you do travel. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe and like button below. And since we're at the end of December, this will be my last video for the year, so have a happy holiday and a wonderful new year. And just remember, 2020 is almost over. So thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.